Those of you I haven't met, I'm Edwin Colfax. I'm the Grant Program Manager here at TIDC. And as you can see from what we just saw, El Paso County is no stranger to innovation. It's really a great use of technology to improve the justice system, and we're going to hear about some other innovations that El Paso County has been responsible for. So let me introduce our next panel here. On the end, we have Commissioner Vince Perez, who was elected to the El Paso County Commissioners Court in 2012. And Commissioner Perez has devoted many of his efforts to improvements to the criminal justice system and more specifically data-driven improvements and how we can use data to improve the quality of justice afforded to indigent defendants. Close to me here we have Judge Alma Trejo. She is the presiding judge of the County Court at Law Number 1 in El Paso and has been there for at that court for 15 years. She also currently serves as the administrative judge for the El Paso County Council of Judges and chairs the Indigent Defense Plan Committee for the county. And then in the middle we have Bill Cox, who's the first assistant public defender for the El Paso County Public Defender's Office. And Bill has been deeply involved in some recent expansions of that office, including a new dedicated mental health unit, and has worked with TIDC in a number of grant projects. So with that, I believe we'll start with Commissioner Perez.
First, I want to thank TIDC for putting on such a great conference. It's just very informative. I want to thank Jim and his staff for all that they do for counties throughout the state. It's also great to see such a diverse group of folks here at the conference. When I looked at the list of participants, it looked like 35% or so were members of the judiciary, about another 15% were court administration, then there was a good chunk of public defenders and attorneys. But disappointingly, the smallest group were commissioners and members of the Commissioners Court. I'll talk about that a little bit later in my remarks, but I think there's only 4 commissioners, if I'm not mistaken, and a county judge that's present. I think that includes myself. And out of the 254 counties in Texas, it's very unfortunate. I don't think any of the urban counties in Texas, what we call the large, there's about 4 dozen or so urban counties in Texas are represented here today. And as you can see, given the importance of this issue and just the amount of resources that are necessary to create meaningful systemic change, it's very unfortunate that we don't have greater participation from members of Commissioners Court throughout the state. But we're here to discuss some of the positive reforms that have occurred in El Paso County that are still ongoing. And I'm proud to be here with Judge Trejo, who has been instrumental in shepherding many of these changes with our county's indigent defense practices, along with other officials, Bill Cox from our Public Defender's Office, other officials who are here from El Paso County and other staff. You know, every county in Texas, there's 254 of them, every county is unique, and every county has its own personality. I saw from the participant list, I think there was a county here that has a population of about 5,000 or so, and El Paso County has a population of about 850,000. So there's a broad range of organizational differences that that vary from county to county. When I first came into office in 2013, the county was still reeling from a very unfortunate public corruption scandal that involved several members of the Commissioners Court and former county judges. Many members of the Commissioners Court were actually indicted and convicted on public corruption charges. The former county judge went to prison. And actually my predecessor on a separate incident, which was completely unrelated to the public corruption scandal, was actually charged and convicted of trafficking drugs while in office. And he was ultimately sentenced, he was sentenced to a 7-year workshop where he became very familiar with the federal criminal justice system. The reason I share all this with you is because this very unfortunate time in El Paso County's history had a very negative impact on the organization, as you can imagine. I believe all elected departments, right from the sheriff, including the judiciary, the district attorney, everyone did their very best to insulate themselves from the Commissioner's Court to the extent possible. And with problems such as indigent defense and others, you can imagine not having that collaboration and not having that close communication is just detrimental to the organization. The only time that folks would really get together would be during budget, when everybody would kind of come in, make their pitch, present their budget, and there was very little oversight by the previous Commissioner's Court. There really wasn't a lot of questioning of processes and practices, at the county. In 2010, we elected a new county judge Veronica Escobar, who's now running. She just recently announced that she resigned as county judge and is running for Congress there in the 16th district of Texas that represents El Paso. And she did a lot to restore integrity to the office of the county judge and to the Commissioner's Court and to the organization as a whole. I came into office in 2013 along with my colleague, Commissioner Leon, who was the former police chief of the city of El Paso. So together with the judge and the Commissioner's Court was much more engaged in the organization. And it didn't matter if it was a non-elected department or elected department. This court was asking a lot of questions, not just about expenditures, but about processes and practices that were ongoing. And we're just sort of asking, especially being new members, we were a lot of just, why is it that things are done this way, and things of that nature. So there was a lot more scrutiny and proper oversight, which I think is the appropriate role of Commissioner's Court. One of the areas that the court had questions about was the rising costs of appointed counsel. As you can imagine, as a new commissioner who's not an attorney, I don't have a legal background, I didn't go to law school. It was intimidating being before someone like Judge Trejo, who has a very distinguished career as a prosecutor and as a judge. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Judge, for how long?
25 years.
25 years. And here I am, 9 months in office, asking her questions about how she's doing things in her courtroom. It was an intimidating process, but I think one that was necessary because, again, there had been such a long period where that oversight really wasn't conducted by the previous Commissioner's Court. In September 13, so exactly 4 years ago, this month, I attended this very conference. So I was 9 months in, and this is the first time I had heard about indigent defense. I didn't really know anything about indigent defense. And this conference was really instrumental in my understanding and really piqued my interest to learn more about the subject matter. And I worked with my staffer, Jose, who's here in the audience. And we spent the next 6 months looking at the county's practices when it came to appointed counsel. And after 6 months of research, we combed through auditors' reports, we combed through vouchers. It became clear that the county really wasn't in compliance, as many counties are in Texas, are not in full compliance with the Fair Defense Act. And so this was an issue where we felt we needed more assistance, and we called up TIDC, and Jim and his staff were actually just incredibly phenomenal. They came to El Paso to conduct what was called a policy monitoring assessment. One was done in Bexar County in 2010, where they found that that Bexar County was not in compliance with the Fair Defense Act in a variety of areas, and they conducted a similar assessment in El Paso County. That was really a catalyst for a lot of changes, not just as it pertains to indigent defense, but also in other areas of our criminal justice system. We now have an independent pretrial office. Our director of our pretrial office is here. We now have 24/7 magistration. If you can believe it or not, there was actually a law on the books that we had to change that only allowed us to have a magistrate Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. So we had to go change the law to allow us to have 24/7 magistration. And so now there's 24/7 magistration in the jail. We've also set up things like a satellite booking office, where people that are low risk, everybody before would go to the jail, which can be very intimidating for a lot of folks, and a satellite booking office in the jail was set up to allow folks that have warrants to go ahead and take care of it. They can make bond and make arrangements and do that. So there's been a lot of positive changes in the system. And I really, none of this, again, would have been possible without leadership of Judge Trejo and Bill Cox and other members of the judiciary and other staff at the county, but also to TIDC. I said I would briefly go back and talk very, very quickly just about how disappointing it is that there aren't more commissioners here. This year there was a bill where TIDC was going to get tens of millions. I don't know, where's Jim? I don't know exactly. I forgot the figure exactly of how much, but it was going to be one of the largest appropriation of funds that TIDC was going to receive in its history. And we often complain at the county, particularly the Commissioner's Court, about unfunded mandates, that we get, you know, all these unfunded mandates from the state. State doesn't compensate counties adequately enough. I mean, as we saw from what took place in New York, I mean, Texas is actually far worse than that. And so I think there's a lot of liabilities there. But when it came down to when this bill came through the legislative process, on the Senate side, I was the only elected official in the state of Texas to testify in favor of this legislation. It was me and Jim. That's it. And Jim, as the executive director, couldn't testify. But sorry, that's my timer to make sure I didn't bore you guys to death. You know, Jim couldn't testify, so I was the only one that testified. How unfortunate is that? And the reason I bring it up is that I hope that the reason that I came to this conference, back in 2013 was because our chief public defender at the time said, you know, Commissioner, you should learn more about this. Why don't you come along? And that's what started it all. And that really led to so many positive reforms that have taken place in El Paso County. I'm sure the judge will go into some, and so will Bill as they talk about it. But it was really that. And I hope that, you know, when you all go back to your counties, that you engage your Commissioner's Court, because they need to fully understand these concepts, these issues. They fully need to understand issues of indigent defense, the criminal justice system as a whole. It's oftentimes just overwhelming and confusing, and particularly, you know, most of us on Commissioner's Court, we're just ordinary folks in that, you know, we're just ordinary people. We don't have law degrees. We didn't go to law school. Many of us aren't attorneys. And that's the way government's intended to be. It's supposed to be, the elected officials are supposed to be representative of the people. And, oftentimes we don't have that level of expertise. So it takes folks like you all that do have that expertise to educate the members of the Commissioner's Court on the importance of creating systemic reforms. Because if we can create reforms at the county level, then they also need to become champions at the state level. I hope I'm never again alone in advocating for additional funds for TIDC in the future. But our commissioners and our elected officials need to really become advocates for these types of programs and for this type of funding if we're truly going to create systemic change. And with that, I'll leave it to Judge Trejo. Thank you very much.